Hello, everyone. We're getting ready to start. We'll still leave some time for people to tune in, but in the meantime, you can say hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. This is a Transatlantic webinar, so let's prove it in the chat at the bottom of your screens. And we'll start in just a minute. And when you do so, by the way, remember to not only write to all the panelists, but you have to change it so it's all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see where you're tuning in from. We already had a hi from Turin in Italy, in Arizona, El Dorado County. Let's see. So far, it's Transatlantic. It's good. Cologne, hi. And Joanna in UK Airbnb, brilliant. New Zealand, great. Sweden, oh, so many different places. Copenhagen, Canada, Dallas, fantastic. Glasgow, Risco, even here in Denmark, Antwerp, brilliant, New York. This is great. Almost 100 people in here. We'll give it a few more seconds before we start. Almost there. Czech Republic, hello, welcome. Orlando, Arizona, Nakatish. Was that right? Louisiana, Scotland. Hi, Donna. And we have Lars that raised his hand. California. All right, I'm giving you like 15 more seconds and then we'll start off. It's great to see so many people tuning in from all over. I think we've already proven that this is indeed transatlantic. We have Dublin, Ireland as well. Pennsylvania. Hi. All right, so I think we are gonna start. We still have some people tuning in, and if you do, so you can say hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. And so again, I want to thank you all for being here today. I'm excited to see continuously the participant number ticking upwards. And I'm also excited about the program that we have ahead of us today. I will be your host, your moderator for the next hour and 10 minutes to be precise. And my name is Signe Jungersted. I am the CEO and co-founder of Group Now, based here in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I should say that I have a very strong team of co-hosts with me today that you'll see more of here on screen in a bit. Chris Adams of Miles Partnership, Guy Bigwood of Global Destination Sustainability Movement, John Lambeth of Civitas, and my good colleague and co-founder, Peter Rømer Hansen of Group Now. And also joining us on screen today is a distinguished panel of 4 DMO leaders. We have Caroline Strand of Visit Stockholm, Fred Dixon of NYC and Company, Michael Otremba of Hamburg Tourism Board, and Jay Beres of Visit Anaheim. So, and finally, though not necessarily on screen, but with us in thought and gratitude are, of course, our partners who have helped us make this happen today. So thank you also to them. Now, before I leave the floor to my good colleagues and co-hosts, I wanted to set the stage for what you can expect for this next hour and 10 minutes. As you all know, the topic of today is funding for tomorrow. And it, of course, goes without saying that we all recognize this immense and often also overwhelming challenges that we're facing, not just tomorrow, but actually also today. COVID-19 is still very much on our minds and shaping our everyday lives and both work and private. The tourism sector globally is continuously taking very heavy blows as we're navigating these really difficult times of a global pandemic that seems to be evolving by the day. The minute that we actually think we know what we're doing, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, a jump to the side. No one really knows what music we're dancing to, you could say. And so in today's webinar, we're talking about tomorrow, but even in that, we're also talking about different time perspectives. And so I wanted to start off with addressing that. I'll share this model with you here just to explain a little bit what I mean. And this is the response framework from World Bank. And as you can see here, the approach is across several different time perspectives. And some, if not all of you, are probably working across several of these time perspectives at the same time. There's the immediate response, of course, focused on keeping the lights on, survival mode, basically, with liquidity injections, cost reductions, or tax reliefs. Then there's the medium term of preparing for recovery, developing new health standards and protocols, certifications, campaigning even. And then, of course, there's the long-term response of building back better, improving tourism offering, and shifting towards a different kind of tourism, perhaps also. Now, across all these time perspectives, World Bank sees efforts of capacity building, developing and implementing digital tools, adjusting to new business models. In today's webinar, we will have a key focus on funding as part of this across all three time perspectives, and specifically, of course, funding for and of the DMOs, but also funding to build back better in a broader sense. I'll just shift this in a broader sense towards sustainable and regenerative tourism. And I also think that in many ways, we're starting to realize now that we're also building resilience in the face of future challenges. So the current COVID-19 is not a standalone and someday over and done with crisis, as the New York Times put it the other day in their article that asked, how does a pandemic normally end? They also answered, it doesn't. Just last week here in Denmark, we had fears of a mutation towards a potential COVID-20, and we're also facing a recession. We're facing global and social instability, climate crisis, just to mention a few. So my point is actually not to start off with this very depressing perspective. Of course, I don't mean to discourage, but I mean to point out that to build back better, we also need to learn from the current situation in building, regrouping, innovating, and designing for resilience. And so today, as you listen to our speakers and our discussions, I encourage you to keep in mind that we will shift between all these different time perspectives of both immediate, medium, and long term. Now, as you can probably hear, we have a lot to cover today. First, we'll hear about the research that actually got us here, both in Europe and in the Americas, in the US and Canada, and the joint analysis across both for funding for tomorrow. Then we'll welcome our panelists for a discussion on their recovery approach, lessons learned, strategies moving forward. And finally, we get a perspective on build back better towards more regenerative tourism and destinations. So I will stop very soon talking so we can get on with it. But I will just firstly introduce a few house rules for today. Questions are ever so welcome. They are in fact encouraged. Please ask them in the Q&A function, not in the chat. The chat is for hi and additional comments, but in the Q&A function, please ask your questions. You can use the chat, as I just said, to say hi, to comment, or even to share learnings and perspectives from your destinations, which you think other destinations or just people in here might find interesting. We have DMOs tuning in from all over the world, it turns out. And I think there are very important things that we can learn from each other in approaching this current situation and in planning for what's to come. And so with that, I'm very pleased to welcome our first two speakers of the day, Chris Adams, Head of Research and Insights with Miles Partnership, and after Chris, in a joint presentation, Peter Rømer Hansen, co-founder of Group Now. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Great you can be with us. The webinar and the themes and insights today was based on two comprehensive studies that were undertaken in parallel. Funding Futures, which was published on August 20th, was a major look at the options and opportunities for tourism funding across North America, and Tourism Taxes by Design was a major study of tourism taxation across all 30 European nations. So we've produced a Funding for Tomorrow summary, which combines the integrated insights and takeaways from both studies, and that's going to be shared out on Thursday, along with a copy of the recording from today, all the slides and other resources. So look out for that. So we've got a jam-packed 70 minutes. So we're going to kick it off with some insights from your peers, research on the 192 city and state tourism organizations across Europe and North America. group now, with the support of ECM, surveyed 67 city organizations in Europe, and in North America with our very good friends at Destination Analysts, we got input from 115 city and state destination organizations, and a shout out to US Travel and DMAC for their support. Okay, so let's dive into a few of the combined results, comparing feedback from European and North American DMOs. And all of these graphs, we've got the European DMOs in blue and North American DMOs are in red. And this first graph, you can see, highlights that North American DMOs seem to be undertaking a greater range of roles and responsibilities. If we have a look down this list from city marketing all the way through to event organization, North American DMOs are more likely to be working on that specific area. And we actually compared directly the relationship between the number of employees and the budget for European and North American DMOs. So you can see on average, North American DMOs had significantly less staff. They're the red line, the red dotted line, and versus their European peers, which is shown here in blue. And this leaner headcount has only become more amplified during COVID-19 with the immediate impact of the crisis. So about 7 out of 10 North American city DMOs in the US and Canada indicated a drop of at least 30% in their budgets for 2020 versus only just under half of all European DMOs. And the predicted impact is likely to amplify further in 2021. So we saw a greater pessimism in North America, with 43% indicating a 40 to 50% drop in their DMO budgets. Just 17% of European DMOs indicated that. We also asked DMOs to respond on a range of statements about the future of their organizations. And so one interesting theme that emerged was the parallel desire to both seek a new normal, for example, focusing on areas like sustainability, resident engagement, etc., but at the same time to also return to normal with the same budgets and staffing, etc. So this was a highlight in both Europe, as you can see in those two statements from European DMOs. And then if we flick across to North America, we can see that in the highlighted statements, again, this desire to both real systemic change and to build back to the way it was. So this balancing of these two sort of parallel and somewhat competing desires is going to be a key theme for the recovery, and obviously a key issue we have to address in the funding and how that is going to support and balance those two competing impulses. So in the Funding for Tomorrow, we have highlighted 10 global best practices from the Funding Futures North American study and the Taxing Tourism by Design European study. And I just want to pick out 4 of them that are particularly relevant and came through particularly strongly from the North American study. And then I'll pass over to Peter, who's going to chime in with insights and recommendations from the European study. So the first best practice is responsive funding. So in this crisis, of course, that means both emergency funding to support tourism and DMOs during the crisis. And I think the panel is going to be talking about this specifically in a little while. And Europe and Canada have seen stronger presentations in both those areas. But at the same time, responsive means funding that as growth returns, funding itself expands to respond and help DMOs better manage tourism and to reinvest in marketing, visitor infrastructure, regenerative tourism, etc. The second global best practice I wanted to highlight is relevance. So this really speaks to the role and responsibilities of DMOs. Are they current and meaningful in the tourism of the future in your destination? For example, Slovenia and many other destinations in Europe, but also a smaller but growing number of North American destinations such as Oregon are taking on greater responsibilities in destination management and a focus on issues as diverse as product and community development, solving issues around short-term rentals or sustainability projects. And then third, the COVID crisis has amplified the importance of resilience. For example, DMOs building up meaningful reserves, such as in destinations such as Memphis, or mitigating risk through insurance solutions such as Florida's hurricane insurance for events and conventions, which has actually been in place for significantly more than a decade. And this type of public-private risk pool may be needed to help jumpstart conventions and events as we come out of this crisis. So many of these options and opportunities are easier with the final best practice I'll highlight, which is dedicated funding. So that's separate, dedicated funding, which reduces the pressure from the whims of political masters. The North American study in particular looked at a wide range of dedicated funding models, from the latest iterations of tourism improvement or recovery districts to tax increment financing and more. So dedicated financing models give DMOs more control and certainty, which will both be critical and precious in the years ahead. So that's a quick look across North America at 4 best practices that emerged and are outlined in that Funding for Tomorrow summary. Let's go over to Peter for his perspective on the issues and best practices in Europe.
Thank you very much for the introductions. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today. Over the next 7 to 8 minutes, I will just talk you through the study that you see on your screen, Tourism Taxes by Design, which is a white paper that we are publishing today, and you can find this study at our webpage groupnow.com after this conference. It's a very long report. It's 70 pages or so, so I'll just quickly run through it and give you the highlights. Next slide, please. First, why this study? And now it seems 100 years ago, because this is a initiative. This report came up really by the beginning of the year, long before COVID, when we were, along with our partners, discussing the big paradigm shift in Europe's urban tourism, where we sort of reversed the question of, back then it was in the era of over-tourism. Now we're in the era of under-tourism. But we saw a need to discuss new means and regulatory measures to face the problems of over-tourism that were seen at many European destinations. And with that, also a need to look at new regulatory measures and funding opportunities for cities and governments, as the funding structures of DMOs are changing rapidly also in Europe. And finally, we thought that tourism tax was a great topic because, as we all know, it's often the elephant in the room. And we just felt a need to take a deeper look at that. With all our city partners, you see them there to the right of the screen. These are destinations and partners that have supported this study and also taken part in the peer review of the findings that we first had. And we are very grateful also for the partnership with the TOA, who shared their data on tourism taxes throughout Europe with us. The guiding questions for this study has been the overall questions: what roles can taxes play in shaping urban tourism? And can they actually regulate flows and demands, which they often seem to be designed for? And finally, and most importantly, can tourism taxes be designed to create a more sustainable and regenerative tourism economy? We've done a lot of desk research, data partnerships with TOA, and also we've done the DMO survey that Chris was just telling you about, and a peer review with all our partners. And just for clarity, I should say that we talk about accommodation taxes as the main thing here, but also airport passenger duties, and we briefly touch on VAT and cruise taxes also. Then this happens, COVID. And for a brief moment there, we thought, is this a good time to do this study? But we really quickly decided with our partner cities that it just really added new layers to the discussion. Because can tourism taxes be designed in a way to help destinations recover faster? And also, how can we design taxes to mitigate the next crisis that Sina was talking about in the beginning? So the report overview here, it's really very comprehensive. It gives a very big an overview of all the practices in Europe and also definition of taxes. There's the funding study, and we're looking at the impact of tourism taxes, all the evidence we could find there. And finally, we give some policy recommendations for all of you who have the same curiosity in tourism regulation as we do. Next slide, please. Now, the overall picture in Europe is pretty much like this. You see all the countries in the red in south of Europe who all have accommodation taxes in place, whereas the blue, we don't have accommodation taxes, with the exception of Scotland and the UK, who've just postponed their tourism tax after COVID came. They were about to introduce one. The typical accommodation tax is about 1 to 3 euros or a fixed percentage in the same range. This is a loose estimate from us, is that about half of those funds that come out of that are earmarked for tourism purposes. In most countries across the board, we find some basic design parameters for regulation of tourism flows. It goes for the category of the hotel, the type of establishments, seasonality, also the visitor segments. Sometimes children are for free, city zones and that kind of thing. You all know it from your cities. Those are all what we call regulatory design parameters that we find across the board. The revenue flows, basically there are three sort of overall revenue streams. The first one, we call it the big pot. This is where the revenues from taxation goes into the big government fiscus, the big black hole of the universe. Second one, where the revenues goes to city and community projects, very often handled by the city administration itself, goes to infrastructure, social projects, nature preservation, cultural heritage, that kind of thing. And finally, we also see revenues for DMOs, CBBs, destination marketing, branding, events, conventions, and visitor service. That's sort of the overall conventional picture. Thank you. So, and I'm sorry to sound like a consultant cliche here, but it all starts with an R for some reason. That's why we call it the R7. Those are the 7 roles that we have found through our research based on all the examples that tourism taxes are playing in our city. General revenue for public good, for regulation of tourism flows and behavior, at least by intention. And also during COVID, we found that it's often, it's a regulation for relief. You could say that a lot of destinations have suspended their taxes now, also reduced their VAT to give the industry relief. Reload is a classic. This is where destinations are using funds for basically for more tourism, for destination marketing, branding, and for events. Rethink, and which is also, it's very much about tourism innovation and tourism research. A lot of that is going on out there, especially in Southern Europe also. Regeneration is the interesting one. How can taxes be used to regenerate the resources of the destination for cultural heritage, for nature preservation, climate? I have a lot of examples on that. We'll show you in just a minute. And finally, that's more theoretical, really. Chris was talking about that. Hurricane insurance, for instance, how can tourism taxes be used for building up funds to create resilience for destinations and build up trust in the marketplace again. We have introduced a general model that for people that are curious on tourism taxes, just like we are. It has 3 dimensions and 3 overall purposes, as you see. There's the demand side in the green. We have the industry side in the blue, and then the habitat, the general society in the red. And then we have sort of 3 overall goals of tourism taxation. In the center is the classic goal to grow tourism. And secondly, to balance tourism. And thirdly, tourism as a resource, the regenerative perspective on that. And those 3 goals can be found in all 3 dimensions. So when you think about your tourism taxation regime and you're talking how to maybe change that with your stakeholders in your city, this is a model that might help you guide some of that thinking. Just to give some examples on the next slides. This is, for instance, Slovenia, where they just recently introduced a tourism tax that is for the promotion of the destination, and the revenues from that is at 25% on top, goes for the Slovenian National Tourism Board for destination promotion. Secondly, we have a tax, an example from Amsterdam that just recently, a few years back, introduced the day tax for one-day visitors to the city, especially targeted at the cruise segment, because they wanted to balance that and have a less traffic and less coaches and less cruise traffic in the city. It didn't work quite the way they intended to, but that was the general motivation, to balance cruise tourism in the city. And finally, we have an example from Iceland, which is very interesting, where the funds from the tourist taxation goes into the tourist site protection fund, and so all the revenues is used for nature preservation, and decided by the board how to use that. Next slide, please. Finally, two examples from the report that we think are really interesting. This one is from the Balearic Islands. Those are the islands off the Spanish coast, Mallorca, Formentura, and Menorca and Ibiza. And the government of those four islands have created this website where everyone can see exactly what the funds are used for. And it's really important for them in the process of setting this up. There's been extensive stakeholder dialogue. And also our research shows that when the purpose of taxation and the usage of funds are used this way, it gives a higher willingness to pay by the consumers. We found a lot of evidence on that across of Europe, and that is just a really important lesson, that it's important to communicate how we use these funds. And this example, this is from Barcelona, also a lead city in this area, we would say, and it's very similar to Balearic Islands. But what's also interesting about it is that all the funds are channeled through a city tourism council, which is where we find representatives of all kinds of communities and bodies from the city, organizations from the city. So it's sort of like a democratic layer on the usage of all the tourism tax that we find very inspiring. You can read all about this in the report. And also, finally, I will just show you the key recommendations from the report. And we have 7 things to remember if you venture into this field. And some of that is it's to earmarking the funds. It also to add this element of local governments, transparency, public consultation, and keep it clear and simple for compliance. Monitor and evaluate the effect, and finally, look at both the benefits and the burdens of the equation when you design your policies. And here on this slide, you just see our website at the bottom. You can find the report there. We've made very clear that we're hiding it. So you have to click through our new website design. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both, Chris and Peter. So we're, of course, running a tight schedule here, but there was one question that came in actually during your presentation, Chris. So if you can unmute yourself. It's from Joanna. Joanna is asking if you can expand on the relevance. What constitutes relevance, and relevant to whom? Tourists, governments in the form of data providers, and industry or industry.
Yes, thanks, Joanna. Yeah, relevant to the context of role and responsibility for the DMO. And I think that's destination specific. So it often includes a broad trend towards destination management, and DMOs not just focusing on marketing, but looking at a greater engagement with, for example, residents and understanding their concerns, helping other agencies regulate and make smart policy, and then building capacity and capability in the industry, and then the whole area of sustainability and regenerative tourism. So those are all broad ways in which you can ensure that the role and responsibility of the DMO is relevant to your destination and meets the opportunities for the future.
So it's relevant across a lot of dimensions, actually. All right, well, no more questions so far. Maybe people are still taking it in, but if you have questions that you think of, you can still put them in the Q&A. Peter and Chris will be here and can answer you in writing. So I'm just gonna quickly jump on. So Lauren, if you could stop sharing screen so I can do the polls. So we will just do a quick poll also because, of course, you don't just get to sit and listen, you have to also work a little bit. So the first poll question that you get here is a little bit complicated, so I'm testing you this time. So I put in the same answer twice. So for the European DMOs, you answer the ones that says EU DMOs. And for the US, the North American DMOs, you answer those that start with USCA. And the question is, how do you expect DMO funding sources and mix of funding will change over the coming years? And you have multiple choice options. And I'm just going to read them to give you a little bit of time to vote. EU DMOs will be, or DMOs will be primarily publicly funded. DMOs will be primarily funded by, or where's the end of that one? Okay, and DMOs will grow more commercial income, ticket sales, and so on. DMOs will fund DMO funding will be one big complex of patchwork of different sources. And if there's any other answers we didn't include, write in chat. And I think the second and fourth one should be DMOs will be primarily funded by private membership or private investments. Sorry about that. I think that just missed out there. All right, so we have some answers coming in. Let's see, is it public? Is it primarily private? Is it commercial? And finally, is it just one big messy mess of a lot of different things, or is it something completely different? You can put it in the chat. So I'm aiming for, we have more than 100 already who voted. I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what happens. End the poll. I'll share the results so you can see. So this is interesting because it's also just to see if there are any differences between now that this is a transatlantic webinar. And what we can see is actually there's a somewhat same split between publicly funded expectations, whereas the commercial, and I know that, sorry, the private is missing here, so that can be part of why, but we have a few more of the North American ones. Commercial income is actually also a little bit the same. I was expecting that to be more in the North Americans. And then funding as a big patchwork, that's actually also somewhat the same, well, US and Canada a little bit more. All right, so let's just, the next one I promise will be a little easier, a really quick one. So do you have access to any special recovery funds? So this goes for everyone on the webinar, whether, regardless of where you're from. Loads of answers ticking in. I'm just gonna give you a few seconds to get it done. Let's see how that splits between. Oh, this is interesting, actually, not as I was expecting. Oh, it's a cliffhanger for you guys to see as well. Let's see, let's get a few more answers in there. Do you have any access to special recovery funds? All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So that's actually also almost an equal split, a 50-50 between yes and no. All right, so the next one will be more for those that actually answered yes. I was expecting a little bit more on that. So here we go. How are those recovery funds that you have access to, all the people who answered yes, how are they earmarked? Are they earmarked for survival, for keeping the lights on? Is it for adapting? That could be health protocols, for example. Is it recovery campaigning, digital initiatives, building capabilities in that area? Is it investment in long-term tourism offering, investment in long-term, oh, that one was twice. Okay, we'll just put that together. Or is it something else? You can put it in the chat. Let's see, we have answers coming in. All right, okay. We can get a few more answers. I know only like half of you answered that you have. Oh, there's one in the chat that put in staffing. Oh yeah, okay, good point, of course. All right, so I see you stopped voting more or less, so I'll share the results with you. So this is what we have. So actually quite a few of the recovery funds are earmarked for survival, keeping the lights on. So that's, if you remember the World Bank framework that I showed you in the beginning, that would be the immediate response. Then we have also adapting and recovery campaigning. So that's more the medium response, whereas for the long-term tourism offering investments, and that's a little bit less. So this is quite interesting. And then of course, staffing, I see there's another answer coming in as well. All right, so that's interesting. And I think this will actually lead us others to answering staffing. Great, thanks. Good input. All right, so I think this will actually provide insights for our panel, which we are now going to start, where you'll explore further into these themes. So John Lampeth, President and CEO of Civitas, will moderate our panel. So I will leave the floor to him for now. John, there you go.
Thank you, Sini. I appreciate the introduction. Let's turn to our distinguished panel. We've assembled an international dream team of DMO leaders to talk about funding ideas. Please join me in welcoming the panel. First up, we have Carolyn Strand, CEO of Visit Stockholm, and one of the key players to promote and develop Stockholm as a sustainable destination. She's a board member at Svensk Tourism and participates regularly in the Forum for Dialogue hosted by the Minister of Trade and Industry at the Swedish government. Carolyn has one of my favorite quotes. She said, quote, "It's in our DNA to create a community where all people feel welcome." Welcome, Carolyn. Next,
Thank you.
Michael Otremba has been managing director of the Hamburg Tourist Board since May 2016, and he's also in charge of the Hamburg Marketing GmbH. Prior to working in city marketing, he worked as vice president of the Munich Airport, Germany's second biggest airport. Michael holds a degree in sports economics and previously spent 10 years working in senior positions in the area of sports marketing. Welcome, Michael. Jay Burris is president and CEO of Visit Anaheim. This is his 7th year at the helm of Visit Anaheim, and since joining the DMO, the destination has reaped 4 record-breaking visitation years in a row. A champion for tourism for the city, Burris has also been instrumental in the construction of the Anaheim Convention Center's 7th expansion in 2018. Prior to joining the team in Anaheim, Burris was president and CEO of Experience Arlington in Texas for 5 years. Welcome, Jay.
Good morning or afternoon.
And finally, Fred Dixon is president and CEO of NYC & Company, New York City's official destination marketing organization. With more than 29 years of experience in the travel industry, Fred not only develops and implements New York City's tourism and convention development strategy, but also oversees 17 global offices comprising sales, marketing, and press professionals in diverse feeder markets, from Australia to the UK, China to Mexico, and India to Brazil. Fred is a respected leader with positions on travel industry association boards and committees, including the U.S. Department of Commerce Travel and Tourism Advisory Board and the U.S. Travel Association's Executive Committee and Board. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you very much, John.
Well, we've just heard some great presentations from Chris and Peter about funding concepts and strategies. Fred, let's start with you. What do you think is the most promising new or enhanced funding options that DMOs should be investigating?
Thank you, John. And this is such a great conversation, and I'm really proud to be part of it. Yeah, I think, what's clear in the conversation so far has borne this out, is it's going to be a blended model. I think certainly for those of us here in the United States going forward, we've learned that there is a shared responsibility in the community now for tourism. We're understanding what it's like to be in a world without travel and tourism, at least in some of the major markets here in the US. So we have a real opportunity to reframe the conversation. What's happening here in New York is something that has been happening on the West Coast, where you are, John, as you know, for quite some time, and that's the development of tourism marketing districts or tourism improvement districts. I have to give huge credit to my colleague, Kristen Jarnigan out on Long Island for pushing forward a bill in the New York State Legislature right now to create a new model for tourism recovery and improvement districts, or TRIDs, that is getting a lot of traction, and we're watching it very closely. So in addition to public funding, share of hotel occupancy tax, supplementing that funding with what is essentially an assessment on travelers coming to the market that's collected by the hotels. And then in addition to that, privately collected revenues, whether that's through advertising and promotion or sales activities, or marketing partnerships, which are now one of the most interesting areas. I think we're going to see, at least here in the US and certainly some of the major destinations, this new blended model. And I'm excited to see it happen because it's going to give us the resources we need to bridge this dark period, but also help us begin the long road to recovery. So it's certainly an exciting time for DMOs, I think.
And Jay, I know you've had that model in place for a while. How important has that been to Visit Anaheim, and where do you see your funding going forward?
Sure. Well, back in 2010, Anaheim was in a position as a DMO similar to most DMOs, where we saw every year we'd go back and fight for our budget with the city. And it became smaller and smaller and smaller every year. So the creation of the TID within Anaheim was structured. Fortunately for me, I was not here at the time, but it was structured in a way because we're a charter city that we could establish it for 30 years. So it was established for 30 years and it was a 2% assessment, and it grew our budget from about 8 million a year to about 20 million a year. And basically, we've been able to do a lot with that and expand our convention sales, our marketing, and our community development and give back. So it's been a great resource for us. It was really changed the game for us in many ways to compete on a level playing field.
And let's talk about roles of DMOs. That obviously impacts funding. And the pandemic has changed not only the way that DMOs function, but also how the communities perceive and look to DMOs for direction and guidance. Michael, I know we were talking about this in the run-up for today's session, and you mentioned that the DMO has taken on, quote, a lighthouse role. Can you explain this idea to us and walk us through how your DMO is making meaningful changes?
Yeah, of course, John. First, let me point out, I feel really privileged to be on a stage like this with icons like Caroline, Fred, and Jay. It's really a pleasure. Well, I think in former times, everything was safe. You know, prosperity was safe. It was safe that Hamburg is going to increase by 600,000 or 800,000 overnight stays per year. And every intern or every trainee after 4 months could predict that the most important source markets international wise come from Denmark, Austria, Switzerland, UK, and the US. So everything was safe. Now, nothing is safe. We're in a period of total uncertainty, and we need predictions how tourism is going to evolve. And this can only be predicted by market research, by data, and by interpreting the data. And I think this is where the DMO comes into play, because this is what we experience at the moment. We have a fundamental role in this play. Everybody turns to us and say, well, where are you leading us? What's the thesis, how it's going to evolve? And how can you help us to get out of this crisis? In times of prosperity, everything was a little bit like, well, let's say saturated. Everybody was doing a good job maybe, but everything was doing fine. But questions were raised, do we need increase of tourism? Do we need more guests? And do we need marketing? And now I think everybody who's really hit hard by this crisis and fight for economic survival really turns to us and say, lead us out of this crisis. And I think this can also lead to maybe common activities more than in former times, and with other partners than we have experienced it before. We established a forum to facilitate change within this industry within 2 days, and we found out that everybody needs this best solution and best cases how to solve the problems. And for the first time, we set up a campaign which is not a marketing campaign to market the city. It was more a campaign umbrella. That's why Hamburg. So we invited every industry, not only tourism, but every industry to be part of this campaign, which is more about an attitude and not about the beauty side of the city. And so this, the signal we found out was confidence from this campaign. We set up a key account structure, and all our colleagues are now in dialogue to collect partners, many from outside the tourism industry, to be part of this campaign. That's why Hamburg.
And you mentioned the campaign's going to have a broader mix, or has a broader mix of industry. Is that ultimately going to change your funding mix?
Well, I think so, because what the partners are doing is they translate this campaign with their messages, and with them they give it credibility, and they, with their channels and with their marketing power, give this campaign a huge and brighter perspective, I guess. So this doesn't really help us in terms of funding, but it helps the campaign to build up strength.
Great. And I know we're getting some questions in about resilience and asking what each of the panelists are doing about resilience. But let me first talk about sort of advocating for funding. Many DMOs have talked about prior deficiencies in advocating for funding and challenges, and have discussed improving their efforts. Caroline, I know the EU put $1 trillion into a recovery fund. Visit Stockholm will receive some of this funding. Can you tell us about your efforts to secure these funds and how that's going to impact your organization?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Visit Stockholm is owned by the city and we fully founded by the city. And of course, like everybody else, the city will have higher costs and larger challenges to take care about. So we need new funding in some way. We can't just talk to the mayor and trying to come in with new projects. We need to really start the conversation in the city in another way. So we have been opening up towards the EU funds for the first time at Visit Stockholm. We did this summer, and I mean, it's a really hard bureaucracy. You have to understand that. So it's a big, I mean, it's a big task to make this work and have the right people who can really thrive with this and make it happen. But it's been important for us to also show the industry that we are doing everything we can that's in our possibility. And this has been an opening in a new way in Sweden now in concern to direction of tourism from the summer. So we did that this summer and been applying, and we got our first project just a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's really important. It's also important because, you know, a capital always are, we are the strong part. And in this crisis, the capital in Sweden has largest problems. So we also need to find another way to work through that. We have, I mean, a big project now, and only that project is just the first project. It's 8% for the budget 21-22. So it's a change.
And Jay and Fred, I know in the US, DMOs were left out of one of the most important recovery programs the government offered, the PPP program. I wanted to ask where you see our advocacy efforts going in the US. And in fact, we had one of the viewers ask about how are you engaging, and has that role different in terms of engaging with the federal, state, and local government?
Fred, do you want to go ahead, or I'm happy to take it if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead, Jay. I can chime in after you.
Basically, we've done more over the last few years in advocacy than we've ever done before. I think U.S. Travel has done a great job in getting the word out there and the importance of tourism. What I don't think we have done as destination organizations is express the importance of us as they still think of us as a lobby group or a chamber, or a nice to have, not a need to have, not a part of, ingrained part of a driver for the economy. And I think we've got to do a better job of emphasizing that. And it's not a frivolous, oh, tourism is nice to have. It is a driver for many things within our economy. And we've also got to look at things like maybe it's our tax classification. We're lumped in with lobby groups and chambers. Maybe we need to have our own and start to designate and put a flag in the ground of our industry of this is who we are, this is why we're important, and really continue to drive that home with the advocacy efforts. Because for us to be left out of the PPP because we're thought of in that category is devastating to many of us. And hopefully in the next stimulus plan, we will be recognized in that and get some relief. But right now, it's been very disappointing and shows we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I mean, I think, you know, in the best of times, destination marketing is often taken for granted, right? It's in moments like this when we can reframe the conversation. And Jay's absolutely right. You know, even though marketing is really the core of our DNA, we have begun to advocate more and more, working closely with City Hall as always, of course, but on the state and federal level. And U.S. Travel has done a remarkable job in leading that charge and trying to get the DMOs, as Jay pointed out, just one piece of this is just getting us into the PPP and the next stimulus round is going to be critical to bridging this next divide. But there is going to be a need going forward for DMOs to find a way to strike that balance with advocacy and marketing.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I know a lot of DMO leaders have talked about is sort of how we're perceived and folks' understanding of the DMO and what it does. And most would say most people don't understand the role of the DMO, nor the value that we're giving back to the community, although that's changing. And Michael, I wanted to ask you, I know that you've talked about the community's lack of understanding of benefits, in particular from tourism benefits and tourism taxes. What do you think our industry should be doing to educate our communities?
Yes, as Jay and Fred pointed out, we're totally underestimated, and tourism has loads of interfaces with issues like how mobility is going to be solved, the issue of mobility in the city, or how can we shape the future of the city center? These are really issues we are linked to, and we have to be part of these discussions to shape the future. I think we should communicate stronger, make it more visible what we do, and that we do not count the number of overnight stays or number of day guests. We care for the quality of life in the city. Wouldn't we have 4,000 restaurants in Hamburg if we wouldn't have 100 million day guests? No, of course not. We wouldn't need it. And the frequency of the traveling public transport system wouldn't be so high. Almost 70% of the accommodation tax goes into projects like festivals or sport events, which citizens and inhabitants visit and watch and go to. Almost 60% is invested in culture, which defines the quality of life and the atmosphere in the city. So we don't only need to do marketing for the city, we need to market ourselves better and make it more visible what we really give back to the community. I think it's an essential task for us in the future. Otherwise, we definitely lose our role in this play.
Well, that's wonderful, Michael. Really focus on, as you said, quality of life as opposed to, and one of our viewers commented, no more counting heads. And there's been a lot of discussion around the crisis and how DMOs might be able to build back better, including closer engagement with residents and a stronger commitment to regenerative funding and sustainability measures. Carolyn, let's get you in here. Can you start the discussion maybe by sharing how you've been engaged in new ways of activating your community?
Yes, I mean, it's all about move from this tourism organization into be facilitating the big dialogue in the city, and to be able to do that, you have to as a DMO, you have to stay focused on just facilitating and not just take the project by yourself. And we're starting up a dialogue with 5 stakeholders at first that we call the Stockholm Promise. We said that we would really like to talk about quality of life and talk about attractivity. And first of all, that an open city is everybody's responsibility, and we have to work together towards this. And what can we do together? And then we thought it was so inspiring, and we had lots of initiatives that we thought that we could climb onto together, and then we open it up for more people and different stakeholders, Stockholmers and companies. And now we are several hundreds stakeholders into the Stockholm Promises, and we are just focusing on trying to be the facilitator, moderate and stimulate this, and not getting stuck into projects. And that's really a tough shift, of course, but it's so beautiful because then it comes into the really big dialogue in the city. So, I mean, when a company calls in and says, okay, so in this Stockholm Promise, I would like to do this umbrella sky to get some passion into that empty street today. Can I do it together with the stakeholders? Of course, ask them. And then we're just facilitating that. And it also will have initiatives that comes with the money also into that, but not in our pocket. It will stay in their pocket. And I think that's a core thing, a very main thing in this.
Boy, that's excellent. You know, and I think we have time maybe for one more question on this topic, because I know this has been such an important topic to DMOs across the globe. Fred, can you talk about what you've done there in New York City? I know you have a foundation and some money has been put into that to benefit the residents. Maybe you could share that with the DMO leaders that are on the call today.
Sure, happy to do that. And I mean, for more than 20 years, we've had the NYC and Company Foundation, which is raised money privately. I know this is not a model that works necessarily in Europe, but we've been raising money privately in a sense, early regenerative methodology here to give money back to small arts and cultural organizations. It's so key to all of our destinations that the arts and culture community thrive and in this time that they survive. So we've been giving grants from tourism marketing to arts and cultural organizations for more than 20 years. We raise that from our members and corporate partners And it's been a great way to give back to the community and to help fund future development. It also feeds into our Tourism Ready program, where we bring more small businesses into the tourism economy. And so we're pivoting all that to tourism recovery efforts now to make sure that the small businesses survive. And this regenerative model is something that I think is not going to go away. I think this is going to be a big part of our future.
Well, that's great. What a terrific discussion. I'll tell you, I wish we had an hour to go on with all of you. These are such great ideas. And I think some of the key takeaways this panel would say you probably can't over communicate. Each of you has really emphasized that primarily to your local residents and to others, and a real focus on quality of life and culture. I think we heard that loud and clear from each one of you. So thank you to each one of the panelists. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to share those thoughts with us. And I will now turn it back to Sine.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you to all the panelists. Very interesting to listen to, and lots of insights that we will be tapping into in our final point on the agenda already. We are going to stay on the long-term perspective of building back better, which I can also see there are some questions on in the Q&A, and a shift towards regenerative tourism. And I think in doing so, it's also important that we remember that building back is not an end destination, or building back better is not an end destination, but it's a process that we are actually already embarked on. And who better to help us rethink and reimagine how to do so than Chief Changemaker? And yes, that is indeed his title, Guy Bigwood of Global Destination Sustainability Movement. Guy, the floor is yours.
Great. Hello. Nice to see everyone. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with such a talented group of people. My focus is on regeneration, and I wanted to share a few words about that, which kind of wraps up a lot of things that I've been talking about. Hold on a second. We really are living in a very unique time, and I think we have almost a once in a career opportunity, once in a lifetime for many of us, opportunity to really design a future for tourism in the destinations that we live in. And it's an opportunity to design something that is obviously better, but it's really aligned with the Sustainability Development Goals and creating back better communities, better places to live, better places to be a citizen in. But this requires a kind of a big jump in thinking. Many of us have been working on sustainability for the last few years. And really, if you kind of start to look at sustainability, it's really been about doing less bad. And I don't think that type of thinking anymore is good enough. Having less emissions, having less waste, having less tourists in certain points, like you'll see here in Greece, is okay, but that's not going to take us to the next level. As Sina said, we are facing other shocks potentially that will come to us, and this is quite scary. Right now we're with COVID, we've then got a recession to deal with. We've got the wave of climate change, there's issues around biodiversity collapse, social unrest in many of our destinations. And so these are all waves or curves that we have to learn to flatten, just as we're learning to flatten COVID. And that's what has to happen for us to create a resilient industry. But this requires different mindsets and different skill sets. So this is moving on from the degenerative kind of extractive mindset and beyond a sustainable mindset about doing less better. This is the regenerative mindset, which is about recovery and rejuvenation, really using tourism as a resource to create better places to live in. Jay was just talking about what he's doing in California, and that's such a great example of using tax dollars to really invest back into the community. So that change of mindset is what we call the regenerative revolution. And this requires us to re-engage with our stakeholders, but all of our stakeholders to really connect with our citizens, to really connect with all parts of our cities, to really rethink about the vision of success and what that looks like for the future. And then to start to redesign, whether it's our management structures, whether it's the structure of how destination is managed whether that's between the DMO and the city and other actors, may require new organizations, new structures. It's obviously around funding, which is what we're here to do and talking about today. And then it's the partnerships that back that up. So we have a really unique opportunity now to redesign that. And if we do that right, we can regenerate the economy, we can regenerate nature, and we can regenerate society and communities. But to do that well, we'll also need to redefine the systems we use and the indicators we use to measure success. And this means new measurement systems, new reporting systems, and new ways to benchmarking. But why are we doing this? Why do we need this funding? You know, what we're saying is this is beyond just bringing tourists into a destination. It's about how do we shift the city and accelerate it towards a zero or post-carbon future? How do we engage our hotels, our businesses to really lower the building carbon emissions, the carbon emissions from energy, from transportation? It's about driving forward an innovation to create a circular economy where waste doesn't exist anymore, where pollution is designed out of the processes we use. And this more than ever is more critical with the amount of single-use plastic that we're having to use and is being used as a response to COVID. So this is a key area of the circular economy. It's also about looking at biodiversity and how we can restore and preserve biodiversity. Many people come to our destinations for its nature, but nature is also gives us a barrier to climate change. It makes us more resilient. As well as what we're seeing now, it boosts happiness and gives us wellness in these tough times. Then there are other areas such as food. We urgently need a food revolution in the way food is grown, farmed, served, and then composted or reused. Some of you are working on that, but not many cities have really implemented a thorough food strategy that looks at all different points. So this is a key area. And then lastly, none of this works unless we have an inclusive local economy. So tourism and the events industry plays a key part in accelerating all these city strategies, and we can create a much better future than that. And so as we heard earlier, you know, the DMO now has this opportunity to be a lighthouse and to really demonstrate lighthouse leadership, to really lead on policy, advocacy, education, not only for tourism, but almost as an example of cluster strategies for a city. And so that's the exciting thing, really, then to sit back and think of the work you're doing as a press of a domino that can catalyze other change and really start to address the Sustainable Development Goals. And that for me is this glorious possibility that we face now as we sit and look at the future in these dark, dark times. How do we create a better future? Regenerative development asks us to imagine our destinations and our communities as even more beautiful, amazing places to live in. And that what I think is the really exciting work around this. So this is something that we're working on at the Global Destination Sustainability Movement. We just launched a white paper with IMEX and Marriott about that called the Regeneration Revolution that looks at the event industry and event management. And we'll be doing more of this on tourism destinations as well. So thank you very much. Back over to you, Sina.
Thank you, Guy. Very interesting. I think we don't actually have any questions. If you have questions for Guy, please, you can still write them in the Q&A. We have a couple of minutes left, but there is a question for the panel that I would actually like to ask you, which is if the panel members, but in this case, if you have any best practice examples of DMOs developing resilience and regenerative activities as a result of the COVID crisis. Guy?
You want me to jump in? Okay, yeah. So
for you, sorry.
Yeah, there's a couple of places that jump to mind that strategies are out. So New Zealand has been working on regenerative strategies for quite a while, and there's some good examples from New Zealand of that type of thinking. And I think more of the implementation of that strategy is now happening through COVID. So there's some cracking examples there. Flanders, again, was one of the pioneers working on regenerative strategies. And they have And that was done before COVID, but COVID is accelerating, changing some of their implementation plans. I think Michelin has just come out, I think some of the team on here, with a new strategy, which I think is a nice example of what a regenerative strategy could look like. There's quite a lot of strategy under development at the moment, from Dublin to Lausanne, Geneva and stuff that we're working on that will be examples of this. And then I think there's strategies that on the journey. I think some of the work in Hawaii is quite interesting. Sedona has just come out with something quite nice. So on the journey to regenerative thinking, but step by step.
All right. Jay, did you want to add something?
Just that I think California has also been a leader in this with our travel responsibly and some of the things that were structured and set up even before COVID, but play right into what we need as a destination right now. And so kudos to the leaders at Visit California for what they've been able to do and structure. And I think they'll be a leader in this moving forward. So excited to see what's going to happen.
All right. Well, thank you for adding that. Okay, well, I think we're almost getting to the end now. And we have one question for you, Guy, before we finish off. New systems to measure mentioned by Guy. What parameters would be worth to receive a larger focus? I guess what parameters in terms of new systems to measure, what should we measure moving forward?
So, I mean, it's about creating holistic measurement systems, right? So in the GDS index, we look at very much at the carbon emissions, the waste, water, environmental aspects. So I think very few cities are really doing that well and have a really clear understanding of what is the environmental footprint of tourism. Some cities can tell you what the whole thing of the city is, and many cities can do that, in fact. But very few, I think Sydney or someone like that can say, well, actually in Sydney, 49% of all the waste generated in Sydney is from the hospitality industry, to give you an example, right? 13% of the carbon footprint. So that's one area I think we all need to get much better on. Socially, the real footprint, the social footprint I think is a massive area needed for innovation that we're spending a lot of time on. Is how do you really look at the footprints of tourism and events? How are we accelerating change? How are we accelerating knowledge? And so I think using kind of social impact frameworks are a key way of doing that. But a lot of work to happen yet on that.
All right. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're about to wrap up now. I can also see that people are needing to leave. It's either late or really early, depending on what time zone you're in and what kind of you're an A or B kind of person. So I just wanted to thank you all once again. Thank you, Guy, for your presentation. Thank you to all the panelists and the speakers. And thank you most of all also to everyone who has tuned in and listened. I hope you found this 70 minutes interesting, and maybe also an occasion to reflect on some new perspectives, both for the shorter, medium and longer term. And all the research reports will be made available and downloadable. You'll see a link or you'll see several links actually on the final thank you slide, so just stay tuned for that one. And from my part, what I would say I've come to realize today, and actually also in preparing for today, is that we can learn a lot from each other across the Atlantic, or just across borders, I assume, and different approaches, because we often look close for inspiration, I think. But in this situation, we're all looking for different models. We're looking for new inspiration, new ways of thinking, regrouping, reimagining, reinventing. And maybe in some cases, we actually don't have to reinvent the wheel because of the fact that we have very different approaches. And I've also seen that in the chat comments right now. There are very different approaches and very different models already invented, tested and tried somewhere else. And so I think moving forward, what we also need is to be open for inspiration, that some models maybe need adaptation to fit your context, but it may be relevant to listen into. And I think we need to be really good at sharing what works and what doesn't. And that's also why we appreciate so much that the panelists were here today to share their experiences. So thank you everyone who tuned in today, and stay safe. I hope to see you all. Thank you.